All right. Well, welcome to our webinar about neurofeedback at the Relationship Institute. We're really happy to have all of you. And my name is Joe Babanese. I'm the co-director of the Relationship Institute, and I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Marilyn Michael.
Hi.
And Marilyn is one of the primary people on our staff who actually does and delivers the neurofeedback services to our clients. So let me give you an outline of what we're going to cover tonight. Just talk for a minute about what the Relationship Institute is, what neurofeedback is. Of course, will be the primary focus of tonight's webinar. And we're going to specifically talk about what it is, what presenting problems can you really use it for, what's it good for, and a review of the research. Neurofeedback has an extensive history of peer-based reviews and research. I will talk about the insurance coverage for neurofeedback, and then we'll give a little summary. So just a quick background on the Relationship Institute. My wife Shirley and I founded the Relationship Institute way back in 1992, and we provide individual, couples, family therapy, as well as psychoeducational workshops. We actually now have 26 licensed therapists working in 3 locations. We're at Livonia and Ann Arbor. And last year, we provided over 17,000 psychotherapy sessions. All right, let me go to the next slide. So next, let's talk, Marilyn, about what exactly is neurofeedback.
Sure. So neuroscience research frequently discusses the plasticity of the brain. And neurofeedback takes advantage of the brain's ability to change itself, or neuroplasticity. It's the way learning takes place. So, for example, neuroplasticity is what allows you to become better at a sport with practice, or allows you to develop a new habit over time. And the research shows that throughout life, the brain continues to adapt and to adjust as it confronts new experiences and new knowledge. So the result is that through life experience, we have different neurons that are firing, synapses grow, and then the brain remaps itself. Neurofeedback is a sophisticated computer-based technique, and it takes advantage of this plasticity of the brain. So simply put, our brains are much more programmable than we ever realized.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Marilyn. It's a good idea, I think, to think of of a computer, and every computer has computer programs in it that we can program to do tasks. And I think for a long time, neuroscientists believed that our brains were fairly fixed. And now we're learning that much like a computer, you can program them to be more coherent, more efficient, more effective, and we'll be talking about that pretty soon. So neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback. Many people are familiar with biofeedback. Depending if you're as old as me, you probably heard of biofeedback back in the 70s or 80s, where you would hear a tone and kind of help you relax, and you could make the tone higher or lower based on your conscious attempt to relax. Neurofeedback is a much, much more sophisticated version of that, because we're actually measuring the brain waves to produce a signal. Your brain gives off electrical signals, and with today's microprocessors being so fast that we can actually measure those signals to give feedback to people to teach this programmability or the self-regulation of their brain functioning. And typically neurofeedback is used with visual or auditory feedback. So one example would be a movie. Sometimes it's set up so that you're watching a movie, and when your brain waves are in a more healthy, coherent state, the movie will be bright and will start playing. When your brain waves automatically randomly go out of the normal range for a particular goal that you set, the movie might get dim or slow down. The same would be with a video game. The game will play when you're in the coherent state. You might hear some signals, some sounds, And when you're not in that, the game will slow down or get dark and you won't hear any sounds. So there's always usually sounds and visual feedback. And the point of this is that your brain wants to get the reward, and then once it gets the reward continuously, it actually reprograms itself. And you don't, unlike original biofeedback, you don't actually have to try. It all happens automatically and unconsciously just by watching a movie or playing a video game. So let's, Marilyn, why don't we show a couple of very short video clips to give an idea in more detail, two different versions of this, exactly how, what neurofeedback is and how it works.
So when people ask, what is neurofeedback? They typically want to know how you do it, what it helps, and how it's different than other options. With neurofeedback, anyone can improve their brain. We train children, teenagers, and adults from age 2 to 92. For children, it's often used for ADHD, emotional and behavioral issues, learning and developmental delays, and struggles in school. For adults, it's commonly used for anxiety, depression, obsessing, and sleep problems. Neurofeedback measures brain activity, like brain waves, and it helps you make more or less of certain brain patterns. By changing brain activity, or by changing how one area of the brain talks to another, you can improve attention, control of your emotions, and behavior. There's research on how it helps migraines, pain, concussions, addiction, and seizures. But what do all these have in common? They're brain issues. With neurofeedback, your brain changes itself. And when it does, typically any of these issues improve. It's not all about problems. Neurofeedback improves performance by changing the timing of the brain. That can help anyone in performing in school, business, or sport. It helps give you an edge. Neurofeedback is different from brain games like Lumosity or tutoring or therapy. Those focus on changing your skills or behavior or how you think. Neurofeedback is focused on changing the brain. There are parts of your brain that help you pay attention, that help you be calm, that help manage your mood and your emotions, or that help you sleep. You don't realize how much your brain affects your mind. With neurofeedback, you get to see how changing your brain can have a huge impact on your life. How do you do neurofeedback? First, we put sensors on your head. Commonly, we measure your EEG brain activity with a special computerized system. The system gives you feedback, such as playing a movie or hearing a beep. For example, when you make a certain amount of beta brain waves, the movie will play perfectly. But as soon as you're less alert and awake, the movie starts to fade out. You rapidly learn how to keep the movie from fading out by changing the brain activity that's being trained. Your brain has a way of figuring out how to get the movie to play. Once you learn new patterns, and that may take practice, your brain tends to remember it. There's a lot of published research that shows that the brain learns from feedback and that measurable changes in brain activity occur after training. So how do you change your brain? It's just learning. Children learn to play a video game, and they never read a manual. Their brain figures it out. How do you balance on a bike and not fall over? Somebody probably showed you, but it's your brain that figured out how to balance. When you train brain activity, your brain figures out how to balance its own activity. So once you train the brain, does it stick? Well, you don't forget how to ride a bike, even if you hadn't ridden in 10 years. It's the same with neurofeedback. Once your brain learns, you don't tend to forget it. There are exceptions, particularly if there's diseases like Alzheimer's or neurological issues, but there are still ways to train your brain. The changes you make with neurofeedback can over time have a profound effect on learning, memory, attention, mood, migraines, and far more.
Okay, Marilyn, that's a good overview. Let's give another one from another doctor who practices neurofeedback. And let me cue that one up.
Neurofeedback addresses brainwave dysregulation directly. So what is brainwave dysregulation? Well, in order to understand brainwave dysregulation, you have to understand a little bit about brainwaves. There are four main brainwaves. Delta waves are produced usually when we're asleep. Theta waves are produced just as we're falling asleep. Alpha waves are produced when we're relaxed and stress-free, and beta waves are produced when we are externally focused. Those are the normal patterns of brainwave activity. When a person experiences brainwave dysregulation, which may be caused by many different things, those patterns, those normal patterns, become abnormal. So that a person sitting in a classroom, for instance, trying to pay attention to the teacher, who should be producing beta waves, which is the external focus brainwave, starts to suddenly produce theta or delta, and they can't stay awake. This is interpreted by the teacher as not paying attention, and the student ends up in trouble. And we call that ADHD. Many of the conditions that we mentioned have their own dysregulated patterns of brainwave activity. So if, for instance, you were producing too much beta wave, people that produce too much beta wave generally experience generalized anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, and things like that. People who produce too many alpha waves very often experience signs and symptoms of depression, withdrawal, and avoidance behaviors. So each one of the conditions that we talk about, insomnia has its own pattern. Tics have their own pattern. Learning disorders have their own pattern. These patterns are associated with the symptomology that is prevalent in each of the conditions that we talk about. The brain will produce the appropriate brainwave at the appropriate time in the appropriate instance when it's regulated properly. Neurofeedback therapy takes abnormal brainwave patterns and makes them normal. When we have normal brainwave patterns, the brain is better to self-regulate itself and overcome many of the conditions that we've mentioned so far. The goal of all neurofeedback therapy is to create normalized brainwave patterns, and we do that through operant conditioning. Neurofeedback is nothing more than a learning modality. It's drugless, it's painless, it has no side effects whatsoever. The therapy itself is basically a guided exercise for the brain to teach the brain how to produce the correct brainwave patterns at the appropriate times. Brain core neurofeedback therapy begins with a comprehensive evaluation. This evaluation includes a quantitative electroencephalogram or QEEG evaluation. During this evaluation, we are able to read and record brainwave patterns at 12 different sites in the brain. Our software then identifies where the brainwave patterns are abnormal, and then the neurofeedback protocols that we use are designed to specifically address those patterns that are abnormal in that particular patient. So for instance, if a patient is producing too much beta waves, the neurofeedback protocol for that patient would be to teach them how to produce less beta waves. And we do that through operant conditioning or a learning modality. A good example would be where the patient is hooked up to the computer using wires that are pasted to the scalp. It's completely non-invasive. There's no pins, there's no needles, it's painless. And those wires are basically just reading the patient's brain waves coming from their brain. The computer software then is going to reward the patient when they're producing the correct brainwave pattern. So, for instance, the reward might be a DVD that the patient is watching. They could be watching a movie, and the movie is either going to play when they're producing the correct brainwave patterns, or stop when they're not producing the correct brainwave patterns. This is simple operant conditioning. Over time, the brain learns that if it wants to see the movie, it's got to produce the correct brainwave patterns. The brainwave circuitry is then reestablished in the brain, and the new activation patterns that have been produced by the brain can now be used out in the normal environment. So now the child who was in the classroom falling asleep is no longer falling asleep, because they know now how to produce more beta waves and less theta and delta.
Good.
All right.
Okay, so what we do is we begin with the QEEG, or as you just heard, the quantitative electroencephalogram, or simply put, the brain mapping. So we place sensors on specific points of the head, and we precisely measure the electrical brainwave patterns. Go to the next one, Joe. Okay. So then the neurofeedback equipment, it analyzes the brain waves and creates what's called the brain map of the delta, alpha, beta, and theta brainwave patterns. This brain map visually shows which brainwave patterns are outside of the normal range. And then once we have that brain map, we can train the person's brain to reinforce those healthier brainwave patterns.
Well, Marilyn, here's a little illustration of what a brain map actually looks like. The top four, kind of looking from the top of someone's head down. You can see where the nose is at the top and the ears are on the sides. And this was somebody who had this QEEG or brain map before they started neurofeedback therapy. And you can see the heavy areas of red and orange color, which indicates some dysfunction in various brainwave patterns. And at the end of the neurofeedback sessions, in this case, I believe there was about 18 sessions, you can see that the red is almost completely gone when we did another brain map or QEEG, and you can see it's almost all clear or light green, which means much healthier normal range of patterns. And in this case, this was a person who was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder whose functioning improved dramatically. And this is sort of a graphical visual manifestation of the very significant change that occurred as a result of neurofeedback therapy. So again, continuing to kind of restate this in a couple different ways just so you understand it. So number one, as Marilyn said, we put sensors on the head, the scalp, the ears to read the electrical signals coming from the brain. You see that activity on the computer screen. And then when the brainwave activity meets the goals that we set, the client gets the visual or auditory feedback to guide their success with a game or a movie. And that's how the whole process works. Let me go to the next one. And here's a picture of a young boy watching a video game hooked up to a neurofeedback equipment. The one we use looks slightly different than this, but I just want to give an example, kind of what it looks like. So from the child's point of view, they're just simply playing a game and having a good time and enjoying themselves. I want to talk about a more personal story, how my wife and I became involved in this. One of our three children was diagnosed with off-the-charts attention deficit disorder in 8th grade. He was exhibiting a pattern where he would do his homework, he'd put it in his notebook, he'd go to school, and he would never hand it in. And the teacher would say, never did his homework. And it was very puzzling because we knew he did it. And so we tried everything possible. I put it in the front of the book. I said, put a sign on it. And, he's always done well in standardized tests, so I couldn't figure out what's going on. So we had him tested, and he was really off the charts ADD. He was also pretty socially isolated, was getting C's and D's in school. And we didn't want to use medication, if there was another way to do it. And I had done a presentation to the Biofeedback Society of Michigan for another business I run, and had met other neurofeedback practitioners. So I called one of those therapists up, and I said, hey, could you work with my son? And this was in Ann Arbor. And our son did 14 sessions of neurofeedback in the summer before he started his freshman year of high school. So I was really worried. He was going to a new school. It was much bigger. And we're very happy to report his grades became like a 3.3. His mood improved. When we'd ask him to do something before, he'd just get grumpy and start yelling. He was like, sure, I'd be happy to do that. It was like, wow, that's amazing. His relationship with his siblings got better. And he began to make more friends, so socially improved. And here's a picture of him with his sister, Noah, on the left. He's a junior at Oakland University. He's got a 3.4 grade point average, and he's made friends in several different so he's got like 3 separate groups of friends, which is really for him a remarkable change. So that's how we first got involved. And I said, this is so great. I got to bring this to our clients at the Relationship Institute. So we introduced it in 2013 in Royal Oak, and then we expanded it to our Livonia office. And we stay up to date on the latest research and updates to the software and hardware through a close affiliation we have with a company in Ohio called Brainmaster, which makes a lot of the hardware, neurofeedback hardware that's sold, and Stress Therapy Solutions, which markets and sells the software. And I do 4 workshops a year with both of these companies in Ohio, and that's the affiliation that we have. So Marilyn, what kinds of issues can we work with neurofeedback?
Oh, neurofeedback just works with a variety of issues. It works extremely well with all types of attention deficit issues. It also works with anxiety, with depression, any kind of sleep disorders, migraine headaches, even those on the autism spectrum. So there's just a myriad of problems that neurofeedback can address pretty positively. And there's just been, I think Joe had said, there's been hundreds of studies done on the effectiveness of neurofeedback. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics lists neurofeedback as one of the best interventions for attentional issues.
And if you're interested in the research, probably the single best resource for the research is the International Society for Neurofeedback and Research, or ISNR.org. They have a great website with a lot of very comprehensive information and research on neurofeedback. And I copied, I did a screenshot from the page of the different research studies, just to give you an idea of the scope of research that's been done. You know, we've talked about attention deficit disorder, migraines, anxiety, but there's all sorts of things that are done when you start to consider this concept that the brain is programmable. It just opens up a whole range of things. One of the exciting things that I'm learning when I work with the company in Ohio, they're now doing recordings of your brain. They're doing a study with Brown University where you can take a brain map of yourself now in 2017, and you could, in 10 years, train your brain back to this level of where your brain is at today if you did have any cognitive decline. So it just gives an idea of again, this programmability and plasticity of the brain is quite remarkable when you think about that and all the different applications of it.
So Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Michigan does cover neurofeedback, usually as long as it's with a child that's 18 years or younger who's been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. Blue Cross has approved billing for adults with other diagnoses when we've discussed a case with them. And Michigan is one of the only states in the US where a major insurance company will cover neurofeedback. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it is. And every time I go to Ohio, they're all jealous of me because they say, well, if you get to use insurance, we have to pay, everybody's got to pay, you know, the full fee out of pocket. So,
Right.
All right, well, let me give a summary, Marilyn, then we can take any questions that anybody might have. So in summary, neurofeedback is an effective, evidence-based, non-invasive technique that can work with a variety of behavioral and emotional issues. We offer neurofeedback sessions both in Royal Oak and Livonia. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, again, one of the innovative leaders in covering this. I think a lot of the other states think about it as, you know, some sort of hocus pocus, but it's a very precise scientific method. And Blue Cross will pay for children with diagnosis of ADD. And as Marilyn said, we have had success for them paying for other issues and even for people older than 18. So if you do have any interest in making an appointment for yourself, for your children, or for anyone else in your family or friends network that may have a child or an adult suffering from some of these issues, you can call our office, 248-546-0407, or email us at info@relationship-institute.com. So now, if you do have any questions, just type a question into the chat box, and we'll be happy to respond. If anything that we covered, you'd like to get a little more information, you had a question about it, just let us know. Oops. Okay. If we have any questions. And you can also ask questions later on, as I said, by emailing us or calling our office, and we'd be happy to respond. All right, Marilyn, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Any final comments you'd like to make?
Well, like Joe said, I mean, we are so open to answering any of the questions that you have. If you do have any friends or family, know of somebody else who has a child that's ADD or ADHD, it's costs nothing for you to just call and ask some questions, and we'll be more than happy to help and answer those as best we can. Oops.
All right, thanks, Marilyn, and
okay.
Best of luck, everyone. Give us a call or email if you have any questions. Bye now.
Bye.